Hi, today we're going to talk about our basic philosophy on strategic pricing at Pricing Empowered. Pricing Empowered, we believe companies need to have not only a value-based pricing strategy, but also be enabled to execute upon that strategy. This should be intuitive that companies that have a good strategy but can't execute it are not going to reap its benefits, and companies that are great at executing a really bad strategy are also not going to reap benefits. Now, there was actually a study done in 2009 by the Monitor Group, and this is one of my favorite studies. And the study asked more than 200 companies across a broad base of industries whether or not they actually priced against a value-based pricing strategy, and second, did they have the technology or business processes in place to actually execute on it. And what they found were that the top companies that were both enabled to execute their strategy and actually using a value-based strategy, they called those the value managers. And those value managers, on average, had net operating profit of 11% to 24% higher than their peers. Now, this demonstrates the value of doing strategic pricing and value-based pricing well. The problem is, a lot of companies believe value-based pricing is the exercise of quantifying the specific value of a product or service to a specific customer at a specific point in time. And for many companies that are executing thousands or even millions of transactions, that's just not practical. So, it is our position at Pricing Empowered that strategic pricing really is a subset of value-based pricing, and it's really the practical execution of value-based pricing by using an ongoing continuous improvement process to zero in on the optimal target price over time. Now, we particularly use lean concepts in all of our thought processes. And in lean looks at continuous improvement as a 4-stage process. In each continuous improvement process, there's a plan phase, a do phase, a check phase, and an act phase. Well, in strategic pricing, we do the same thing. Our planning is really our strategy building, and typically that strategy building is done through pricing segmentation, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. Once we know how we're going to segment our customers, our products, our orders to discriminate in price, that's our strategy, we need to execute it. That's our step 2. Our do process is price execution. Now, after we actually execute, because we're doing this as a continuous improvement process, we're not always going to be right. Either our initial segmentation might be off, or we might have changes happening in the marketplace. So that's why we do pricing analytics, and that's our check phase. Now, during our check phase, we're going to find areas that either we might have been a little off in the onset, or something has changed in the market, and we make corrections. And that's our act phase, or optimization. So we look at strategic pricing as a 4-prong approach and a continuous improvement process that gets us to a perfect optimal target price for any situation. In our plan phase, when we're talking about segmentation is the exercise of grouping particular lines of your transactions into larger groups to make it a manageable process. And once we group them, we can treat them in similar ways to get to our target pricing. So the segments that we typically look at are customer segments, product segments, and order segments. And we start our segmentation by doing different exercises. We can strategically segment by defining attributes of our customers that may align with our growth strategies. We can define attributes of our products that may help define our product positioning strategies. And we may define order attributes that help align with our operation strategies. So here are some examples here on the slide, like channel market geography, or in the product family, life cycle, competitive positioning, and in order, the order volume or value-add services. So these are all types of segments that we can use strategically. We can also analytically derive segments, which we'll talk about further on in the year. But this is a basic approach. Now, once you actually define your segments, you can target specific unit prices for any combination of a customer product order, Or another way to manage it would be to intentionally discriminate margin targets or discount levels based on those attributes. The idea is that you would have an independent approach on what the price point should be in any situation, knowing that you will be analyzing if the number was correct, so that you will be measuring the effectiveness of that particular point. Over time, you will learn whether or not it was correct. It's also important for us to note that when we do these exercises to get to targets, we need to incorporate all price elements, not just invoice price. And so that's where the idea of the pricing waterfall comes into place. This is very common in a lot of discussions in strategic pricing. And basically the idea is that there are a lot of non-traditional price elements that really make up a customer's net price. And so as we do these exercises, we need to account for all of them. You can see several examples here that we're not just optimizing a list price or an invoice price, but we look at things like freight allowance, rebates, co-ops, post-invoice adjustments, and whatnot. So we'll incorporate all of these into our training in the next year. But again, it's important that when we get to a target price, the target price can be the target invoice price, but typically we also want to consider the target net price. It is our experience, in order to launch this continuous improvement process in the most efficient and effective manner, there are 5 questions that executives need to answer. And they need to answer it well and be clear with their organizations in order to enable the continuous improvement process to go as well as it could. Now, typically, companies that answer these 5 simple questions and launch this continuous improvement effort that is strategic pricing can reap 2 to 4 points of net operating profit. Now, the first question that needs to be answered is, how does your pricing strategy support your financial strategy? Typically, companies that can't answer that question have price misaligned with a financial strategy. This is typical for companies that have a sales force that's empowered to making pricing decisions without actual accountability to price, meaning they're not compensated on it, and they probably don't have access to value information. So they're making decisions based on, for instance, the procurement person they're up against telling them what their value is. The next question that needs to be answered is, how does your pricing strategy align with your sales and marketing strategy? And companies that can't answer that question typically see their price misaligned with their commercial strategy. This is typical for companies where pricing may reside in finance with little oversight for marketing and sales. And typically in this kind of company, we'll see blanket increases across all products that are not differentiated. So every year there's a 2% price increase and finance is driving it, and there's really no feedback on, well, this doesn't make sense for this particular market, or we could get more in this particular geography. The next question that needs to be answered is, where do you consistently price discriminate because you have a different value proposition? And we call that problem no apparent price strategy. This is typical for companies that really believe the market dictates price. And I challenge those kinds of companies that, wouldn't you want to know more about your value than your customers do? The next question that needs to be answered is, how often, to whom, and on what do you intentionally deviate from your standard pricing strategy? Now, this gets to more sophisticated levels of pricing, and basically the idea here is that companies should have an independent idea of which kinds of customers in what types of situations warrant a deeper discount than usual. And what happens in these companies that don't have an independent take on that, the pricing strategy never gets to invoice. So, for instance, this type of company might have a very strong product management group that really has architected their list prices well against the product value offering in a very logical way, but then sales is not given any guidance as to where it's appropriate to discount. So discounting happens rampantly, indiscriminately all over the place. The next question that needs to be answered is, how often, to whom, and on what ways do you give back profit dollars after you invoice price? That comes back to the price waterfall idea. And the problem here is that lots of companies that have good pricing strategy and may even have structure on discounting at the invoice level still don't have a lot of structure at that net price level. Their pricing strategy never gets to pocket. So that question needs to be answered as well. For organizations who have the support from executive sponsorship to answer these 5 questions, they will be rewarded much more significantly in the strategic pricing journey than other companies. As you embark on your strategic pricing journey, or you continue from one that you've already started, it's important to us that you communicate in your organizations that what we're trying to accomplish here is really about building price fairness and not about price gouging. And unfortunately, I believe that strategic pricing sometimes gets a bad reputation for being about indiscriminately raising prices to the point where it harms customers. And that's not accurate at all. Here's an example of one of our clients, and what you're looking at is one of their specific part numbers, and each dot represents a customer and the unit price that customer was paying. You can see a wide range of prices in the market from 20 cents to $1.22. In traditional price increases, when there's inflation or finances driving a need for a price increase, the organization would go ahead and raise prices at the same level. In this example, 5%. Now, this would be done to all customers regardless of historic price points. So you can see in this example, we have a very large customer, $350,000 customer, who gets a 5% increase. We have a couple very small customers, maybe one around 40,000, another around 1,000, also getting 5%. And the one that's around 30,000 has a price point that is literally a third of what the large customer that's over $300,000 is paying. And there's another customer who's paying well above the market average, and they're also getting 5%. Now, I would argue that traditional price increases are gouging the customers that are willing to pay more, but at the same level, those that are willing to pay less are getting a lower price dollar impact. So for instance, 5% on 20 cents is much less than 5% on $1.20. And yet, the 20-cent customer is getting a wider gap of advantage over time because 5% on 20 cents is less than 5% on 120. Now, the alternative thing is to discriminate those price increases based on the size of the customer, how important the customer is to you, and where their current price points are versus their peer group. So let's assume every dot here is in the same segment. These are customer peers that compete against one another in the marketplace. In a strategic price increase, those customers, by definition, since they're in the same segment, have earned the same price point. And so strategic pricing is about leveling the playing field over time. In this example, the customer that was well above the market average gets a small 1% increase. The large customer gets the average increase of 3%, let's say. And the small customer that did not earn the price level that it had in the past got a 10% price increase. So that's what strategic pricing is about. It's an ethical approach to getting rewarded for the value that you create. That's what we have today. Our webinar next week will be about pricing. Are you really in the game? So we're going to help you reflect whether or not you're really doing strategic pricing in your organization. We're going to be launching a self-assessment tool that will help you understand which portions of your strategic pricing journey you can improve upon the most. And hopefully this will help you have some dialogue with your executives on any support that you can use in specific areas of your organization. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk to you next week.